it's time for our first guest speaker, Leon Ashby. He's an advisor. Unfortunately, Senator Malcolm Roberts from One Nation, Senator for Queensland, couldn't make it. Leon's one of his chief advisors. He's come along to inform us on what's going on about property rights. And Leon used to have farms himself, and it's pretty enlightening what he's got to say. So it's all yours, Leon.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Peter. Really a pleasure to be here. Now, we're probably used to people getting up for politicians who haven't had much background. Hopefully, my involvement with One Nation is going to be a bit different to the normal staffer in Canberra. Also, I'd just like to say to Bob and to others that Senator Roberts met with the landholders in North Queensland, and they asked me to do a little bit of research. We've been chatting with them over the phone, and we did a little bit of background work on a court case in South Australia where the land was challenged. It was wanted for defence purposes. It's a French family case, and that was wanted for defence purposes, and it was, part of it was two parts of the property, some for defence and some for giving to an Aboriginal land claim. And because it wasn't for Australian defence purposes, the part that was not for that was the court case was won by the landholder, so I was able to keep that land. So we see that as a precedent that maybe the landholders in North Queensland can use to argue their case that this is not for Australian defence purposes, it's for Singaporean defence purposes. So that's one argument we'll be putting to them, that they shouldn't proceed. Okay, my property rights experience, it's both in two states, South Australia and Queensland. I assist Senator Malcolm Roberts, who's on the left. I do things like, a bit of research, writing speeches. I advise on rural issues, things like property rights and other things. So we get together in the mornings and talk about, what's happening for the day, or we have weekly meetings and I have a fair bit of input there. I also chair the morning party meetings for One Nation, and I look at legislation. So I have a bit of an all-round job for the party. My main points are that secure property rights are the basis for our freedoms and being able to maintain our high standard of living. We need these property rights constantly, and we have to keep fighting for them. So if we have a deed, we think, it's all pretty straightforward. We have a lot of rights there, and it's intrinsic. But my understanding is that it's equal to whatever we get, a leasehold or a freehold lease or anything like that. A freehold, we get freehold title or a leasehold or a grazing property. We have a bundle of rights, and a lot of those rights are not, explained, defined, but we soon find out when we've lost them what it was that we had. And so what happened to me was when I started looking at my issues of losing property rights, I started to realise that without them, we had no ownership, no income rights from the property, no incentive to improve our property, and we had no justice when our rights are removed. Those things happened to me. So the other point I want to make is that you only have the rights that others allow you to have. And if currently our laws, they continually remove or erode our rights. This just happens all the time. Because we're getting more and more laws, we don't even know which ones sort of override our rights sometime till down the track. And so we lose our ability to earn a living quite often. And we need to continually assert that we have the right to those secure property rights. And as more legislation and centralised bureaucracy sort of impinges on us, we have to either counter it with safeguard legislation or revert back to a simpler bunch of laws. Now, I think the simpler bunch of laws, that's what Senator Roberts and I think is the way to go. Now, this is our family in 1997, this is when we were in Queensland, and when we started doing water spreading, and that's when my story of finding out what property rights was about. Then in 2003 we were back in South Australia, and that's when I lost another lot of property rights. So I grew up at Congrong near Mount Gambier. Some of the things we did was produced vealers there and had some fat lambs. We also did our own shearing. We milked several hundred head of cows. My brother still milks about another 400 now. We had centre pivot irrigation. I had about 200 acres. In 1984 we lived in this house in Queensland. It was on a 12-acre property near Springsure, central Queensland. We bought store cattle like this. and if we were lucky, in a few months' time or 18 months' time, we'd sell them for that. We mustered wild cattle in scrub country. We used timber for our house extensions, milling our own timber off the property. We built a second set of stockyards, and in 1989 we sold that property, and I bought a 36,000 acre property, Barkura, 50 k's north of Aramac. So it had all the luxuries you could want. We homeschooled the kids, we renovated the house, and we refurbished the shearing shed. It was pretty run down. We had kangaroos living in the house when we turned up. Sometimes the yard looked like this, and then sometimes in droughts it looked like that. So you sort of see, it was a bit of an extreme. We went down to 4 inches of rain for 1 year. Sometimes we had shearers, and sometimes we had friends help us peeling off the fibre. And when each shearing was done, we hoped we'd be able to get enough money to keep going the next year. So for about 7 years we were on the edge of being sold up. We experimented with African chooks, or ostriches, cashmere goats. We harvested kangaroos that was rooshooting for 18 months. And we had a few wild pigs as well off the property. We had a lake on the property, which was about 500 acres each year that would get water in it, and you can sort of see the area of 500 acres there of water, Lake Barkura, and when it really filled up it was about 4 times that size. In 1997 I put together a water spreading project in the district. It was about 20,000 acres I think. We used stick rake timber to slow water flowing across the land, and we also had contour banks, and so we've got a dozer in with an angle blade to make a lot of contour banks. And we ended up making shallow ponds on thousands of acres. I had about 2,500 acres on my property, and others had a similar sort of area. And the results were that our grass production increased like 3-fold here in this area, and in other places. The best one was the next one, where it went up to 17 times as much. So very barren sort of land that wasn't growing anything, we could turn that around in 2 or 3 years. For doing these sorts of things, I was runner-up in a 1999 Land Care Research Award, and later on got a centenary medal for that and other things I did. In 2000, this is where the fun started. Peter Beattie, the Labor government, overnight stopped land clearing. And what did he say? He said, we needed the Green vote, that's why we had to do it. Of course, John Howard and the Coalition, they agreed. We need to get the Kyoto Protocol sorted out, so we've got to do it, guys. That's what they told us. So landholders lost the rights to do the following things over of concern ecosystems. Now, on my property, that was about 1/3 of my property, and it was millions of hectares across Queensland. It was under this sort of title of no concern. And so what we lost was our rights to do water spreading, clearing trees, fencing, ploughing, burning, which was to freshen up the grasses. We couldn't do that. In fact, to even, if you went mustering and you drove over a small bush and you destroyed it, if it wasn't a grass, you're up for a $125,000 fine. That's what you could be fined. So that was the draconian sort of measures that we had to face. Now, the reasons given by the government were that, farmers need to be sustainable, and farming will be more productive if we stop these activities. So that's what we were told, and we would be arguing, you don't know what you're talking about. So I showed Peter Beattie some photos like this, and I'd say, look, here's before tree clearing on the right. You can sort of see the grasses, they're almost non-existent, very bare land. This is the same rainfall, the same grazing pressure as on the left. But on the left is after tree clearing, and you get a beast to 10 acres, whereas on the other one you had a beast to 100 acres. It was pretty well useless. And so that was what we were trying to do to the land. We were doing it very successfully. And but they sort of said, well, since tree clearing puts more carbon dioxide in the air, well, we need to sign the Kyoto Protocol. We're just going to have to stop your tree clearing. So that was the basis of the whole argument. And I argued with Peter Beattie for about 3 hours on that. Didn't get anywhere though. The bundle of rights we had when we bought the property had been reduced overnight. So we had the rights to plough, to burn, water spread. They just disappeared. And we lost them, and we just thought, well, what can we do about it, I thought, right, well, obviously in the Constitution there's something there. Surely we have rights. We at least should be able to get just terms. Well, this was done by the will of both the state and federal parliaments. and there was no just terms. We argued about it, well, I did with the departmental people in Brisbane for probably about 6 months, and there was no way of reversing it. Our Ag Force representatives had been brainwashed. I'll say that is probably the best description I can put it, that the Constitution was interpreted, they'd interpreted it, some lawyers had interpreted it differently, so that there was no way that Section 51 was going to allow us to have our just terms, because it was a state legislation, that it was done under not a federal one, and there was about 2 different shady sort of arguments that were given to us why we couldn't appeal, and we wouldn't be successful if we had a major court case over it. So basically we didn't proceed. And I'd sort of, I want you just to look at that bit there. That argument is where we can make a difference in the future. The fact that we have been diddled by these sorts of things, they are basically legal arguments, and we can get them reinterpreted if we get the politicians in Canberra and in state government who can understand what we're talking about, so we can wind back to what we had originally. So just take note of that, because that's going to make, that's where we've got to go in the future, reversing that. For financial and family reasons, we sold our property. We didn't get what we wanted for it, because we'd lost some rights and people didn't want to pay a lot for it. But we bought a South Australian property near Beachport, which is near the Woke Wine Cutting, which is 28 metres deep. You can probably see it on the left. The water runs from a swamp through that and into Lake George, and we had frontage to Lake George, and the title said that we owned the land right up to the water's edge, which went backwards and forwards. So basically you had grazing rights or whatever you wanted over that. Now, the South Australian government decided they wanted that 70 acres around the lake's edge for nothing, because it had vegetation on it. If we go to the next slide, you can see that's where a grazier previously put a fence line, and because of that there'd been some natural revegetation happening there, and that was actually pretty good fodder feed for if you had a drought situation. And that's what I wanted to keep it for, but I also wanted to sell the property. So when we went to sell it, the department refused to transfer the title unless we gave away the land that the government wanted in return for the transfer to happen. So it was a bit of blackmail. So once again, a government had removed our property rights, and we could do very little or nothing. You could fight it, but eventually they were going to find a way to do it. And that's what they just had, the mentality that was going to happen. So when we lose our property rights, what do the rights get transferred to? Well, who do they get transferred to? And it's actually to bureaucrats. And they're departmental people that interpret the laws as they see fit. As you've heard the stories tonight, people are coming out and they're sort of going on our property and telling us what the laws are and how they interpret them. Now, some of that may hold water and some of it mightn't. And we're not very good, not very smart sometimes in arguing our case. So what I want to encourage people to do is to learn about what rights you actually have, and to learn what arguments you can put against them, and stand your ground and be able to argue against it, and also get people in Parliament who can argue for you so that they know it, and we can go to the media and eventually turn around people's attitudes in Australia. That's where I think we've got to go. Okay, and if we contest their view, it costs us a lot to go to court. In some cases I know people who it's cost them $500,000, and they've lost probably 10 years off their life with the worry of fighting some of these court cases, and sometimes they've won, sometimes they've lost. Now I ask, is that much different to communism? It's not, in my view. It's very much like that. But we also have some Trojan ideas I consider. This is what Malcolm Roberts and I consider are some other issues that relate to property rights. Now, a Trojan issue I would call it's an idea or policy that looks good, and we think, yep, that's all right, but ultimately it undermines us. And we all know the story of the Trojan horse, how that undermined the city that took it in. And so landholders, small business people, churches, communities, we've accepted numerous Trojan ideas, I believe, over the past. And I'll just give you an idea of some of them. They're cleverly devised to move our rights and freedoms, and if we refuse them, we get attacked by what we're calling the elite. Malcolm calls them the elite, the people who try to have all the the big arguments on Q&A and in Parliament itself. And they have politically correct ideas. So here's a cartoon that just sort of portrays that. And we see that these ideas that we have been presented, we have to recognise what they are, and we have to see what's good about them and what's bad about them. So if we go to the next bit, there's a lot of them I think we've swallowed, and I've got 4 on the next slide. The first one is that we must reduce carbon dioxide to stop global warming, save the planet. Sounds a great idea. Okay, but what does it do to people and property rights? Removes your property rights, as you've seen from my story. It makes power prices increase, gives us less reliable power like we have in South Australia. It wastes money in gabfests, and it does a whole lot of other things that are not so good. Agenda 21, Sustainable Development. The UN idea, which is now called Agenda 2030. Okay, it does, well, it's camouflaged in pleasant language, all these things about sustainable development. A lot of people look at it and go, oh, it sounds pretty reasonable, until you realise that we lose our sovereignty. The UN bureaucrats will control our resources, and we'll end up with things like higher food prices. Now, to me, they're all things that we shouldn't lose, but that's what happens with it. The Murray-Darling Basin Plan's another one I'd call a Trojan idea. If we look at it, we have loss of farming water rights, we get lower food production, we get higher food prices and greater flooding risks in certain parts of the Murray-Darling Basin. And so there's a lot of negativity there as well we need to recognise. Now, building dams is bad for the environment is something that the Greens believe, and a lot of people swallow that one too, because that's going to stop our water infrastructure. It's going to reduce productivity. We're not going to get jobs if we keep going along this way. It reduces our drought proofing, and it reduces our hydropower generation. Now, our party, One Nation, is very keen to start getting infrastructure like dams started again. Thank you. Now, these are our Trojan ideas that impact us, or farmers. I call us farmers. I still consider myself a farmer, even though I'm not on the land at the moment. I'm looking for a bit of land, but we'll get there again. Native vegetation must be conserved is sort of one of these ideas that, it affects us. And what do we have? Visibility on roads is reduced. We get greater fire hazards. We get more deaths from wildfires in our community because of those fire hazards. All very negative things. We've just got to be able to get out there and say that we need to change those ideas. Free trade is good. It's another idea. What that makes is that we compete overseas on price alone. We don't compete on the quality of the goods, so lower quality goods can come into Australia at a lower price, and our higher quality goods are at a disadvantage. We see that as very unfair. We also see that market deregulation, it's proposed as a great thing, things like the dairy deregulation I went through. Currently this screws farm prices down or under the cost of production, and it allows supermarkets to control farm prices. Farmers get run into the ground with their lifestyles, working all the time, constantly, just to try and make ends meet, and we can't afford to pay for extra workers. There's some of the consequences of it. I see they're bad. We need to introduce things like fair trade, where imports have to be equal to Australian quality products, and return to some form of orderly marketing now. We know that there's going to be constitutional matters about free trade between states, and we know there's also going to be a lot of other issues when we're trying to, make things go forward in those ideas. And that the world's sort of about things like companies going overseas, using cheaper labour, and overseas tax havens, and exporting goods back to their original country. We know that those things happen, but we think there's a way around this, because surely we're a pretty smart country. We've done things. If you look at the next slide, we've done a lot of things. We've been very creative in solving problems. And I've just listed a couple there: stump jump plough, wireless Wi-Fi, things like that. We're a can-do nation. Why can't we start thinking our way out of some of these problems? Dairy companies organise milk payments so that milk's produced out of season, and so they get higher protein and less water content. That's a pretty smart idea to get that result. So, you know, surely we can manipulate things for our market so that we can get some benefits. We have more than our share of science Nobel Prize winners, like 13 of them. So surely with a smart country, we can manage our marketing in such a way to have farmers surviving and thriving, but we don't. And we should be able to set up laws so we have secure property and water rights, but up to this stage we don't, and we'd like to change that. Senator Malcolm Roberts wants to maximise freedoms and get rid of Trojan ideas. Hopefully this next little bit will work, so we hope you'll support his efforts. Let's see if the next bit works. Okay, go for it, Malcolm. And next bit, beautiful. Thank you very much.